The truth you are seeking cannot be found through your intellect, because your intellect is a disease. You are drowning in words, in thoughts, in endless anxiety. But there is a single forgotten door within you that can silence this madness in a split second. Let me show you this simple Zen trick and watch how the world you are so worried about suddenly vanishes. Hello, my beloved friends. It is a beautiful joy to gather in this silent space of awareness here now. Before we allow our hearts to dissolve into the timeless teachings of Zen, I invite you to join our growing community by clicking the subscribe button, hitting the like icon, and dropping a comment below to share your reflections. Sharing this video helps spread this light to other seekers. If you wish to support the continuity of these teachings, consider clicking the Join button to become a member, offering a contribution through Super Thanks, or exploring our specially crafted ebooks. Your presence and support are deeply appreciated as we walk this path of awakening together. Zen is not a philosophy. It is not a religion in the ordinary sense of the word. It is a direct pointing to your true nature, a radical path of paradox that flips everything you think you know completely upside down. The mind is always in search of answers, always craving explanations, definitions, and logical maps. It wants a clear destination and a step-by-step method to reach it. But Zen says that the ultimate truth cannot be captured by words, nor can it be explained by the intellect. The moment you try to understand existence through the lens of the mind, you miss it entirely. The mind is a processor of complications, while existence is fundamentally uncomplicated. It is an open secret, vibrant and alive, available to anyone who is willing to drop the heavy burden of thoughts and simply be. Think about how you live your day-to-day life. You are constantly running, constantly striving, constantly trying to become someone else. You are never content with what is. You are always projecting your desires into what might be. This constant movement away from the present moment is the root cause of all human suffering. It creates a deep, lingering anxiety that follows you like a shadow. You think that if you achieve more wealth, more status, a better relationship, or even spiritual enlightenment, you will finally find peace. But this is the ultimate trick of the ego. The ego thrives on the chase. It feeds on the distance between where you are and where you want to be. If you suddenly stop chasing, if you completely relax into this very moment, the ego begins to dissolve. And that is exactly what the mind fears most. It fears its own disappearance. When you come into the presence of a true master, you are not coming to learn something new. You are coming to undergo a process of total unlearning. A teacher gives you information, builds your knowledge, and expands your intellectual horizon. But a master is utterly destructive. He takes away your crutches, shatters your belief systems, and burns your scriptures. He leaves you completely naked, with nowhere to hide and nothing to cling to. This can feel terrifying to the logical mind. The mind wants rules, commandments, and safe territories. It wants to be told exactly what to do, what is right, and what is wrong. This is why humanity has always been so obsessed with dogmatic religions and political systems that demand absolute obedience. Obedience is comfortable because it removes the burden of responsibility from your shoulders. You can simply follow the crowd, obey the priest, and live a dull, mechanical life. But obedience is just a beautiful name for slavery. It destroys your intelligence, kills your creativity, and turns you into a machine. A true master never asks for your obedience. He creates trust. Trust is entirely different from obedience. Obedience comes from fear or greed, from the desire for reward, or the terror of punishment. Trust is a love affair. It is an intuitive feeling that arises deep within your heart when you recognize someone who has entered a new dimension of consciousness. You look into their eyes and you see an infinite sky, a profound silence that you have never encountered before. You feel a sudden, irresistible pull to walk with them into the unknown. This trust does not make you a slave. It gives you the immense courage to stand on your own 2 feet, to drop your artificial masks, and to discover your own authentic being. An obedient person becomes dull and dependent, always waiting for an order. A person who trusts becomes intelligent, alert, and deeply alive. Let us look closely at the mechanism of the ego, at how it takes over your entire existence. When a child is born, he comes into the world completely egoless, like an uninflated balloon. He has no fixed boundaries, no clear-cut separation between himself and the universe. He doesn't know where he ends and the rest of the world begins. He is in perfect unison with the wind, the trees, the sunshine, and the rain. This is why a child possesses such an extraordinary innocence and fearlessness. He can look at a snake with wonder rather than terror, because the concept of death has not yet poisoned his consciousness. He lives in a state of pure here now, flowing effortlessly with the river of life. We look back at those early years with a deep sense of nostalgia, calling it the golden age of our lives. It feels as though the best part of our existence happened at the very beginning, and ever since then we have been falling deeper and deeper into darkness. This universal experience is the origin of all the ancient parables about the fall of man. We were once in paradise, and then somehow we fell from grace. But this fall does not happen in some distant historical past. It happens to every individual in the course of their growth. As the child grows, society begins to pump hot air into the balloon of the ego. We give him a name, an identity, a label. We tell him he is a boy or a girl, a Hindu, a Christian, a Muslim, or a Jew. We teach him to compare himself with others, to compete, to be ambitious. Our entire educational system is designed to strengthen the ego. We tell the child that he must come first in his class, that he must win medals, that he must become successful and powerful. We train him to believe that his value as a human being depends entirely on his ability to outrun others. This constant pressure creates a deep split within his being. He is forced to drop his natural, feminine qualities, his receptivity, his capacity to love, his innocence, and adopt a purely aggressive, male-dominated mindset to survive in a competitive world. By the time adolescence arrives, the ego begins to assert itself aggressively. The adolescent enters a phase of constant friction and rebellion. He wants to do his own thing, to prove his independence, to say no to his parents and teachers. Society has spent years training him to be a warrior, to fight against the outside world, but now he brings that same fighting energy home. This is why adolescence is always a time of immense turmoil and confusion. The teenager is caught between two worlds. He can still feel the lingering sweetness of his childhood innocence, yet he is being pulled forcefully into the cold, competitive reality of adulthood. He begins to sign his name with an exaggerated flourish, insisting on his distinct personality and demanding his own private space. His character begins to harden, and the unique contours of his ego become clearly visible to everyone around him. Then comes youth, where the balloon of the ego is inflated to its absolute peak. This fullness of the ego is deeply connected with sexual maturity. Nothing gives more air to the ego than sex, because sex brings a powerful sense of individual vitality and creative power. The youth feels omnipotent, ready to conquer the world, ready to tear down traditions and launch revolutions. He is full of fire, aggression, and ambition. He refuses to believe in the old ways, saying a loud, defiant no to the church, to the state, to the scriptures, and to God himself. He believes he is entirely separate, an island unto himself, completely distinct from the rest of existence. This is the moment of the ego's ultimate triumph, but it is also the beginning of its deepest crisis. As the years pass, between the ages of 28 and 56, man enters the phase of middle age. Here, The ego is inflated far beyond its natural capacity. For nearly 3 decades, you have been trained to do only one thing: pump more and more air into your balloon. It has become an automatic habit, a mechanical routine. You go on striving, accumulating wealth, chasing power, and building your respectability without ever realizing that the balloon has a strict structural limit. You keep pushing more air in, and the internal tension becomes unbearable. This is the origin of modern stress, anxiety, and hypertension. This is the period when psychological and physical illnesses begin to explode within your system. You may have achieved everything you ever wanted in the material world. You have a big house, a successful career, a family, and a respected place in society, yet you feel completely empty inside. You feel a profound, terrifying restlessness that you cannot explain. You have succeeded in building a massive personality, but in the process, you have completely lost your soul. This is the point where the Western mind runs to the psychotherapist. But Western psychology is caught in a fundamental limitation. It still believes in the concept of a healthy ego. It treats the ego as something that needs to be repaired, strengthened, and adjusted to function normally in a sick society. When a puncture appears in your life pattern, when you begin to shatter under the weight of your own stress, the psychotherapist helps you patch up the holes so that you can go right back to pumping more air into the balloon. It is like a garage where a broken car is repaired just enough to be driven back into the same chaotic traffic. But the ego can never be healthy. To speak of a healthy ego is a complete contradiction in terms. The ego itself is the illness. It is a false concept of separation that cuts you off from the organic unity of existence. The Eastern approach, the psychology of the Buddhas, is radically different. When a puncture happens, when your life begins to fall apart, Zen does not try to patch you up. It tells you to celebrate the puncture. It encourages you to let all the air out, to completely deflate the balloon, and to return to your original state of empty innocence. This is what true sannyas is: the voluntary puncturing of the ego. It is the realization that the separate I you have spent your whole life building is nothing but an illusion, a phantom created by social conditioning. When you drop this illusion, you don't disappear into nothingness. Instead, you discover your true being, which is infinite, deathless, and one with the entire universe. You enter a second childhood. You become twice born, not into a new physical body, but into a completely new dimension of consciousness. To heal this deep human divide, a therapist must learn to work in an egoless way. True therapy is not a clinical technique. It is a profound expression of love, Love can only flow when the ego is completely absent. If a therapist approaches a patient with an ego, with a sense of professional superiority, knowledge, and authority, the patient immediately becomes defensive. The ego is inherently aggressive, and aggression automatically triggers a defensive reaction in the other. But love is completely non-aggressive. It creates a safe, silent space where the other person can drop their guard, become vulnerable, and expose their hidden wounds without fear of judgment. Without love, there is no real healing. There may be behavior adjustment, there may be intellectual analysis, but the deep core of the person remains untouched. An egoless therapist does not think of himself as a healer. He understands that he is merely a vehicle, a hollow bamboo through which the divine healing energy of existence can pass. The patient is simply someone who has lost contact with the source of life, someone who has built such a thick wall of ego around himself that the universal light can no longer penetrate his being. He is disconnected from his roots, and that disconnection is the true cause of his mental and physical suffering. The therapist's role is not to teach him a new doctrine, but to hold his hand and serve as a bridge back to the source. If the therapist is empty, if his own mind is silent, then the infinite grace of existence begins to flow through him naturally. This vital, rejuvenating energy showers upon the patient, dissolves his psychological blocks, and gives him a sudden, direct glimpse of egolessness. That single glimpse is enough to trigger a profound inner healing. To achieve this state of emptiness, you must understand that your intellect is a very small, limited part of your being. It has answers for small, superficial things, but it is completely impotent before the great mysteries of life, love, and God. The intellect always wants to dominate, to control, and to demystify everything. It wants to turn the beautiful, living song of existence into a cold, logical syllogism. It says, if I cannot understand it, then it does not exist. It would rather deny the existence of God, love, and mystery than accept its own limitations and lose its dictatorial grip on your life. The intellect is the ultimate expression of the ego. It is the tiny tail of the cow that gets stuck in the window and refuses to let the whole body pass through. You can easily pass into the divine dimension, but your intellectual tail keeps wagging in your head, holding you back, keeping you chained to your doubts and explanations. If you truly want to experience reality, you must drop the desire to understand it intellectually. Religion cannot be understood, it can only be lived. The moment you bring the analytical mind into the realm of the spirit, you create immense complexity out of something that is beautifully simple. Look at the trees, the birds, the stars, and the rivers. They don't have an intellect. They don't read scriptures. They don't discuss philosophy. Yet, they live in perfect harmony, in an open state of absolute simplicity. When a simple heart meets this simple existence, there is an immediate, ecstatic merging. The complex mind can never meet the simple. It can only meet its own complications. It projects its own inner chaos onto the world and then complains that existence is a difficult riddle. Stop trying to solve the riddle. Existence is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a mystery to be experienced, a song to be sung, a dance to be danced. When you stop trying to comprehend the incomprehensible, a wonderful thing happens. You begin to know. This knowing is entirely different from knowledge. Knowledge is always borrowed from the outside. It is memory, a collection of dead facts and theories that you gather from books and teachers. It belongs to the past, and it keeps you imprisoned in the past. The more knowledge you accumulate, the heavier your head becomes, and the more doubtful and skeptical you become. Knowledge can never bring you to a conclusion because there is always more to know. It is an endless, linear chase that leads nowhere. But knowing is an immediate, direct perception that arises from your own inner subjectivity. It is a sudden flash of lightning that reveals the whole of reality in a single, timeless moment. It doesn't happen in parts. It happens in toto. This direct knowing is what Zen calls Satori, what the Upanishads call Samadhi, and what the Chinese sages call Tao. It is the awakening of your true, original face, the face you had before you were even born, before your physical body took shape and your mind was conditioned by society. Your original face is your formless reality, your pure, unclouded consciousness. It is the ultimate witness within you, the one irreducible element that can never be analyzed or broken down. You can witness your body, which proves you are not the body. You can witness your thoughts and emotions, which proves you are not your mind. But you can never witness the witness itself. It is the absolute origin, the foundational space of your existence. To discover this witness is to discover God. My friends, look at how much energy you waste every single day just to keep your eyes shut to this reality. You are like a person who clenches his fist tightly all day long, exhausting himself, and then complains that his hand is tired. To keep your fist closed requires a continuous investment of muscular energy. But to open your hand requires no energy at all. You simply drop the effort, you relax, and the hand opens naturally. To remain miserable, to remain tense, to remain anxious requires an immense, unnatural effort. You have to constantly feed your desires, maintain your worries, and defend your ego. But to be happy, to be peaceful, to be graceful requires absolutely no effort whatsoever. It is your natural state of being. You don't need to earn happiness. You only need to relax your grip on misery. Relaxation is the ultimate door to the divine. People often come to me and say, I am groping in deep darkness, Osho. Can't you please pull me out of it? But I look at them and I see no darkness anywhere. The sun is shining at full noontide. The light is blindingly bright, but they are clutching their eyes shut with all their might. They are creating their own darkness, and then they cry out for help. No one can force your eyes open. If I were to force your eyes open against your will, the light would only blind you, and you would be angry with me for destroying your sweet dreams. You have to understand for yourself why you choose to keep your eyes closed. What dreams are you still hoping to fulfill? Have you not dreamed enough through millions of past lives? Have you achieved anything of lasting value from all your ambitions, desires, and worldly pursuits? You remain just as empty, just as hollow as you were at the very beginning. Even now, when you ask about enlightenment, you are turning it into a new dream, a new ambition for the ego. The ego says, I have conquered wealth, I have conquered status, now let me conquer enlightenment, let me become a Buddha. This is the same old game played with new spiritual words. Enlightenment is not an achievement for the ego. It is the total disappearance of the ego. You cannot attain Buddhahood. You can only realize that the I who wanted to attain it was a complete fiction, and that what remains in its absence is already the Buddha. This very earth is the lotus land, and this very body is the temple of the divine. Nothing needs to be added to you. Nothing needs to be improved. You are already perfect here now, but you are fast asleep, dreaming that you are a beggar wandering in the dark. Zen does not offer you a set of moral commandments to make you a better person. Imposed morality is nothing but a plastic mask that you wear to hide your inner ugliness. It creates a deep psychological split, turning you into a hypocrite, a schizophrenic being who lives a double life. On the surface, you show a beautifully righteous public face, but through the back door, you continue to indulge in everything you have repressed. This constant conflict destroys your inner harmony and robs your life of all natural grace. A moralistic person is always tense, always watching others with judgment and condemnation, because his own morality is built on fear of punishment and greed for reward. He doesn't love goodness. He is simply terrified of hell and hungry for paradise. I don't teach morality. I teach meditation. Meditation is the ultimate medicine for the human soul. When you sit in deep silence, when your mind stops chattering, and you become a pure witness to your inner landscape, all your fear and greed begin to evaporate. Out of that profound, thoughtless awareness, a natural righteousness arises within your heart. You don't have to make an effort to be good. You become good, because goodness is the natural fragrance of a silent soul. You don't look for a reward in the future, because the right act is its own ecstatic reward. You share your love, your joy, and your peace with others simply because you are overflowing with them, much like a rose sharing its perfume with the wind without asking for anything in return. This natural way of living is what it means to be here now, to drop psychological time completely. The mind lives either in the dead past or in the unborn future. It never allows you to inhabit the only reality that actually exists, the present moment. When you are here now, you are in tune with the eternal harmony of existence. You flow with the river of life like a dry leaf carried effortlessly by the stream. You don't push the river. You don't fight against the current. You simply surrender to the total flow of existence, trusting that the universe which gave you birth will take care of you perfectly, just as it takes care of the lilies in the field. This total surrender, this absolute let go, is the birth of true grace. My beloved friends, do not miss the opportunity that is available to you in this very moment. The grove of light is right here in front of you. The celestial music of existence is playing all around you, but your ears are plugged with the noise of your own thoughts. Take the jump into silence. Allow yourself to die as an ego so that you can be resurrected as the divine being that you truly are. You will lose nothing but your chains, your illusions, and your miseries, and you will gain the entire universe. Walk this path with absolute courage. Trust your inner light and let your consciousness bloom into its full, magnificent glory. If these words have struck a chord within your heart, remember to interact with this video by liking it, subscribing to our channel, and sharing your journey in the comments below. If you wish to dive deeper into these transformations, consider supporting our mission through the Join feature, sending a gift via Super Thanks, or downloading our meditation ebooks. Thank you for being here now with me, yet filled with an unearthly radiance that defied his physical decay. He looked at his weeping disciples and smiled. He was not dying. He was simply preparing to slip out of his worn-out shoes. For 96 years he had watched the seasons come and go. He had watched empires rise and fall, and he had watched the breath move in and out of his chest. He knew thoroughly that the physical structure belongs to the earth, but the one who resides within has no age, no boundary, no definition. When his disciples asked him where he would go, he laughed uproariously and said, "Where can I go? There is nowhere to go. I will be right here, dissolved in the wind, moving in the ocean, whispering in the trees." This is the ultimate playfulness that arises when you are no longer entangled in the false identity of the ego. You look at life and death as a beautiful game, an exquisite dance of the formless, manifesting into form and then returning back to the formless. When you live with this deep insight, the fear that has haunted your heart for decades simply vanishes. You don't build great walls to protect yourself from the inevitable. Instead, you open your doors wide and welcome whatever comes with immense gratitude. If life brings you health, you enjoy it. If life brings you sickness, you face it squarely, looking into the very essence of the one who is experiencing the pain. This is the radical approach of Zen. It does not look for escapes. It does not offer you sweet illusions to comfort your frightened mind. It demands that you wake up here now to the reality of who you are. You are the infinite sky in which clouds gather and disperse. The clouds may be dark and full of thunder, or they may be white and beautiful, but the sky remains completely untouched, completely unpolluted. To understand this deeply, you must look at how your mind is constantly spinning webs of desire. The mind cannot exist without desire. Desire is the very fuel that keeps the wheel of the mind moving on and on. You see an object, a beautiful car, a grand house, a perfect relationship, and immediately a desire arises within you to possess it. The moment that desire takes root, the mind begins to plan, to calculate, to project itself into the future. It asks, "How can I get it? What strategies must I use? What path must I follow?" Now you need thoughts. You need an endless traffic of ideas to navigate the marketplace. Your mind becomes a chaotic storm of anxieties, worries, and tensions. You are no longer here now. You have moved into the phantom world of tomorrow. But if you look closely at the nature of desire, you will see an absolute absurdity. The mind is always asking for that which is not, and it is always completely dissatisfied with that which is. This is the very mechanism of discontent. The moment you achieve that which you desired, the thrill begins to fade. The new car sitting in your garage is exciting for a day, perhaps a week, but soon it becomes part of the routine. It becomes old. The mind immediately loses interest and starts looking around for the next thing, the next illusion to chase. You spend your whole life running after mirages in the desert, always hoping that the next oasis will quench your deep thirst. but the thirst remains unquenched because you are looking in the wrong direction. You are looking outward, trying to fill an inner emptiness with material things, with titles, with power, with respectability. Zen is the reverse process. It is a total turn inward, a 180-degree shift in your consciousness. It tells you to drop the desiring mind completely. When there is no desire, for what should you think? Why should the mind chatter? The wavering disappears. The stirred waters of your inner lake become perfectly still, and for the first time, you are able to reflect reality exactly as it is. A non-thinking consciousness arises within you, not a state of dullness or sleep, but a state of supreme alertness, radiant intelligence, and absolute sensitivity. You hear the birds singing outside, you feel the gentle breeze touching your skin, you see the colors of the flowers with a vividness you have never known before. Your senses become completely unplugged from the noise of your thoughts. Look at the immense paradox of existence. When you want more, when you are consumed by greed and ambition, everything is always less than you want. You are always poor, always lacking, always miserable. But when you don't want anything at all, when you relax into absolute contentment, everything is too much. It is unbearably, beautifully too much. A small, ordinary thing becomes a source of infinite ecstasy. Chopping wood becomes a meditation. Carrying water from the well becomes a sacred dance. Holding the hand of a friend becomes a deep spiritual communion. You look at the cherry tree blooming under the misty moon, and your heart overflows with a joy that has no reason, no motive, no condition. When joy has a reason, it belongs to the world of time, and it is bound to pass. But when joy arises out of your own empty, silent being, it is there forever. It is eternal. This deep contentment is what sannyas is all about. It is an entering into the stream of life, a total let go where you no longer try to steer the boat. You throw away the oars, you relax, and you allow the river to take you wherever it flows. The river is already moving toward the vast ocean. You don't need to push it. You don't need to guide it. You just need to trust it completely. But to trust existence requires immense courage, far more courage than it takes to fight and compete in the marketplace. The politician needs aggression. The warrior needs a strong ego, but the meditator needs absolute vulnerability. He needs to drop his armor, his defenses, his pride, and his knowledge. He must be willing to become a complete nobody, a zero, a hollow bamboo. When you become a hollow bamboo, you don't become a non-entity. You become a vehicle for the divine music to flow through. The song is not yours, it belongs to the whole. You are just a passage, a flute resting in the hands of the ultimate musician. This is the state of a true master, and this is what he reflects back to you when you come into his presence. A master is not a teacher who gives you doctrines or dogmas to memorize. He is simply a mirror. If you stand before a mirror with a dirty face, the mirror reflects your dirt. If you stand before it with a beautiful smile, it reflects your smile. The mirror itself has no choice, no preference, no judgment. It doesn't say, "I like this face and I will keep it," or "I hate that face and I will refuse to look at it." When you move away, the mirror is instantly empty again, perfectly pure, ready to reflect whatever comes next. This mirror-like quality of consciousness is beautifully illustrated in the ancient story of the Zen master Hakuin. A young girl in his village became pregnant out of wedlock, and her furious father demanded to know the name of her lover. To escape punishment, the girl lied and blamed Hakuin, the highly revered master whom the entire village worshipped as a living Buddha. The angry father rushed to the temple, threw the newborn baby down at Hakuin's feet, and bombarded him with every possible insult, sneer, and curse. Hakuin did not protest. He did not get defensive. He did not cry out his innocence. He simply looked at the angry man, took the baby gently into his arms, and said, "Oh, is that so?" For months, his entire life was turned upside down. The village that had once worshipped him now treated him with utter contempt. They refused to give him alms. They mocked him on the streets, and his disciples abandoned him in droves. Yet, without a single word of complaint, Hakuin wrapped the baby in the sleeve of his ragged robe and went from house to house in the freezing rain, begging for milk to keep the child alive. He accepted the situation completely, with absolute tathata, with supreme suchness. Whatsoever life brought to his door, he embraced it as a gift from the divine. Eventually, the young mother could no longer bear the immense guilt and agony of her lie. She confessed to her father that the real lover was a young man from the marketplace. The rigid father, now almost mad with fear and shame, rushed back to Hakuin, prostrated himself at the master's feet, and begged over and over again for forgiveness. Hakuin listened silently to his frantic explanations, looked at him with the same calm, compassionate eyes, and said only, "Oh, is that so?" He then handed the baby back to the grandfather, without a single comment, without a hint of triumph or resentment. This is the consciousness of a Buddha. It is completely consistent in its inconsistency, completely steady in its emptiness. It does not swallow the praise of the world, and it does not get destroyed by the condemnation of the world. It remains a pure mirror. If you swallow the praise of others, you are instantly caught in the trap of the ego. You become dependent on their approval. And tomorrow, when those same people turn against you and insult you, you will suffer immensely. Your suffering is not caused by their insults. It is caused by your own identification with the false image they created for you. When you live as a witness, you drop all labels and titles. You realize that inside you resides the true man of no title. You are neither a saint nor a sinner, neither educated nor uneducated, neither a success nor a failure. You are simply this pure, unclouded capacity to see. The Master Rinzai used to emphasize this continuously in his discourses. Once, a monk went up to him, deeply perplexed, and asked, "What is this true man of no title?" Rinzai did not offer a long philosophical explanation. He immediately jumped up, grabbed the monk tightly by his collar, and screamed into his face, "Speak, speak." The monk was completely shocked. His mind went blank, and he stood there dumbfounded, unable to utter a single word. Rinzai let go of him, laughed, and exclaimed, "What worthless stuff is this true man of no title?" Rinzai was trying to show him the reality directly. In that very moment of shock, when he grabbed his neck and shouted, the monk's past, his knowledge, his scriptures, and his philosophical theories were instantly shattered. For a split second, the monk was nobody, an absolute zero, a mirror reflecting nothing but the immediate presence of the Master. That was the true man of no title, but the monk missed the point. Instead of relaxing into that beautiful emptiness, he started thinking, "Why is my master behaving so brutally? What is the correct scriptural answer to his question?" The moment he entered into thought, the mirror became covered with dust again, and he became worthless stuff. This is what happens to many seekers. You are so addicted to words and explanations that you miss the actual experience when it is presented to you directly. You ask a Zen master, "What is the Buddha?" and he answers, "The Buddha." You ask him, "What is the Tao?" and he answers, "The Tao." This looks like an absurd repetition, a meaningless tautology to the logical mind. But the Master is trying to hit your mind to a full stop. He is refusing to define one unknown word with another unknown word, because that leads to an infinite regress, a vicious circle of words that never ends. He is telling you to halt, to stop verbalizing, to drop the game of language, and to look at the living reality that is sitting right in front of you. The mind always wants to move on the same superficial plane, changing from one polarity to another. If you are worldly, You think that by moving to a monastery and becoming religious, you have transformed yourself. But you have only changed the objects of your desire. Before, you were desiring money and power. Now, you are desiring heaven and enlightenment. The plane remains exactly the same. Your greed remains exactly the same. And your ego is just as strong as before, perhaps even stronger, because now it is a pious ego, a spiritual ego. To speak of a spiritual ego is an absolute contradiction, a dangerous delusion. It is far easier to drop a worldly ego than to drop a spiritual ego, because the spiritual ego feels so righteous, so noble, so close to God. This is the ultimate trap that every seeker must face on the path. The ego will allow you to meditate. It will allow you to fast. It will allow you to renounce the world, as long as it can remain the master on the throne. And when you come close to the ultimate peak of silence, the ego will play its final, most deceptive card. It will whisper into your ear, "Look, you have arrived. You have attained Satori. You have become an enlightened Buddha." It is a beautiful, deeply hypnotizing idea, and because it satisfies your deepest spiritual ambition, you will tend to accept it blindly. You will start feeling great, worthy, superior to all the ordinary mortals around you. But the moment you claim achievement, you have missed the mark entirely. The only true criterion of ultimate realization is that there is no feeling of attainment at all. There is no claimant left inside you, no one to beat the drum and say, "I have achieved." The I has completely evaporated in the very process of awakening. When the light of the sun rises, the darkness does not say, "I have become the light." The darkness simply disappears. When enlightenment happens, the separate ego simply ceases to be, and what remains is an immense, pregnant silence, a vast emptiness that has no boundaries. You don't find yourself anywhere. You look inside, and the old guy is gone without leaving a single trace. You are empty, you are absent, and yet, for the first time, you are truly present as the whole. This is the original realization, the discovery of your original face. It is a state of deep wonder, of total innocence, like the eyes of a small child who knows nothing but looks at everything with absolute awe. This innocence is very intimate. It is your very nature. Knowledge is always foreign, gathered from others, borrowed from the past. But this not knowing is your authentic self. It is a profound state of bewilderment where all your logical certainties have dissolved, leaving you completely vulnerable to the raw, unmediated presence of existence. To live in this state of innocence means that you must settle your terms with death. Death is not something that will happen to you in the far distant future. It is a happening that is interwoven with every single breath you take. Living and dying are simultaneous, two sides of the same coin. The moment you are born, your dying begins too. Each moment, millions of cells in your body are dying, and millions of new cells are being born. It is a continuous, dynamic flow. If you cling only to the part that you call life and try to reject the part that you call death, you create a deep, structural imbalance within your consciousness. You become a fear-oriented being, constantly trembling, constantly defensive. Look at how the human mind splits reality into dualities. In the West, people have become deeply death against. They choose the peak of life, the orgasmic high, and they completely shut their eyes to the valley of relaxation and rest that follows it. They treat death as an enemy, a robber that must be fought, delayed, and ultimately destroyed through science and technology. In the East, people became sex against. They focused entirely on the frustration and the valley, rejecting the peak as a momentary illusion. They became death-prone, longing to escape the wheel of life entirely, wishing for an ultimate death where they would never be born again. Both approaches are lopsided. Both are expressions of fear and prejudice. An authentic man does not choose. He stands in the middle, perfectly balanced, looking at both the peak and the valley as parts of one organic unity. He sees that life is activity, an adventure that takes you outward into the world, and death is rest, an inward journey that brings you back home to rejuvenate your vital energies. Without the night, the day cannot be. Without rest, activity becomes a feverish, destructive madness. Every single night, when you fall into a deep, dreamless sleep, you enter a miniature death. You drop your name, your money, your worries, and your ego, and you submerge yourself in the ultimate source. This is why you wake up in the morning feeling so fresh, so full of new life and vitality. If you can allow this let go voluntarily while you are fully conscious, death loses its terror entirely. It becomes a beautiful, celebratory climax to a life well lived. It is like a snowflake dissolving into the pure, clear air, quiet, graceful, completely natural, leaving no scar, no trace behind. Death only destroys the dust that has collected on the mirror of your consciousness. It cannot touch the mirror itself. The witness within you is eternal, never born and never dying. It has watched you pass through millions of different forms as a rock, as a tree, as an animal, as a man, as a woman, and it will continue to watch when this current physical body returns to the earth. When you clean your mirror through meditation, you realize that you have already arrived. You are already sitting on top of the ultimate treasure. Nothing has to be achieved. Nothing has to be practiced. You only need to wake up and remember who you are. This remembrance releases a tremendous hidden energy within your being, an energy that has been dormant, locked away behind the walls of your conditioning and your fears. To truly unlock this potential, to break free from the mechanical ruts of the mind, and to live in a state of absolute, radical freedom, requires a deep understanding of your inner architecture. This profound process of self-discovery, this awakening of your inner divinity, is what allows you to reclaim your natural alignment with the universe. It is a complete restoration of your original power, a path that guides you to break through the illusions of the ego and stand fully in your authenticity. For those who feel a deep, burning call to dive even further into this practical science of inner transformation, to systematically dismantle the false masks and step into a space of absolute sovereignty, you can find our specialized guide, the Hidden Energy Protocol Reclaim Your God Mode, available directly through the links in the description below. This guide is crafted to support your journey of unlearning, helping you to dissolve the psychological blocks that keep you chained to the past, so that you can float effortlessly with the river of life, completely here now, as a pure expression of the cosmic whole. This absolute shift in your perception is not a change in what you see, but a radical transformation in the one who sees. When you look into this vast space of your own subjectivity, you begin to uncover the deep architectural framework of the human ego. Zen approaches this inner landscape with the sharpest precision, dissecting the separate identity into three distinct layers, three distinct pillars of illusion that must be thoroughly looked into and dissolved. Master EQ gave the ultimate distillation of this path when he wrote that single word over and over again: look, look, look. He was not giving an intellectual instruction. He was pointing directly to the three gross and subtle forms of egoism that keep your true consciousness bound to the wheel of suffering. The first look is directed toward the grossest layer of your separate identity, the physical ego, the ego of form. From the very moment you open your eyes as a child, society begins to condition you to believe that you are identical to the physical vessel you inhabit. You look into the mirror and you say, "This body is me." You become deeply attached to its shape, its beauty, its youth, and its vitality. Because you identify with this changing form, you become instantly vulnerable to the torturous fear of its decay. When the body is young, you are proud. When the body grows old, you are miserable. When the body faces illness, you experience deep psychological anguish. But if you look deeply into the nature of the physical form, you will see that it is not a fixed, solid reality at all. It is a river, a constant flux of elements moving in and out of existence. The body you have today is not the body you had 10 years ago. Every cell has been replaced. Every molecule has shifted. It is a dynamic process of borrowing from the earth. And one day, the entire loan must be returned. The moment you look through this physical form without identification, you realize that you are the timeless watcher of the body, not the body itself. The morning of youth comes and goes, the evening of old age arrives, but you remain the radiant consciousness that illuminates both. Once this first gross illusion is penetrated, you are able to cast your vision deeper into the second layer, the psychological ego, the ego of the mind. This is a much more subtle and slippery entity than the physical body. Your psychological ego is built entirely out of words, memories, ideas, opinions, and constant inner chattering. You think that you are your thoughts. You think that you are your achievements, your labels, your miseries, and your psychological traumas. The mind is like a busy highway with non-stop traffic moving back and forth, and you are sitting in the middle of the road, getting hit by every passing car, identifying with every single thought that crosses your brain. When a sad thought arises, you say, "I am sad." When an angry thought flashes, you say, "I am angry." You never leave a gap between the thought and your being. Zen says that this psychological identity is a completely social product. It is borrowed from the opinions of others, built out of language, and sustained by continuous mental projection into the past and the future. When you look into this psychological stream with absolute non-judgmental awareness, you notice a beautiful thing. The thoughts are moving, but you are completely still. You are the sky, and the thoughts are just passing clouds. The cloud cannot stain the sky. It cannot alter its infinite purity. By dropping the identification with the chattering mind, you enter the space of no mind, a state of profound inner silence where you are no longer a slave to your own mental gymnastics. Yet, even when the physical and psychological identities are dropped, the ultimate trap still remains: the spiritual ego, the ego of the soul. This is the hardest, most deceptive, and most dangerous layer of all. When a person renounces money, family, status, and intellectual knowledge, They feel that they have become deeply religious. They start identifying with the concept of the Atman, the soul, the ultimate spiritual achiever. They say, I am a holy man. I am a seeker of truth. I am meditating to achieve nirvana. This spiritual ego is incredibly pious, noble, and respected by society, which is precisely why it is so difficult to dissolve. It is the same old greed and ambition, but now it has put on a religious robe. First, you wanted to accumulate material possessions. Then you wanted to accumulate intellectual knowledge, and now you want to accumulate spiritual merits and cosmic experiences. You are still trapped in the dimension of becoming, still chasing a faraway target in the future. Zen goes the farthest and the deepest by completely shattering this final illusion. It declares the pillar of no soul, no self. When you peel the onion of your identity completely, throwing away the physical body and the psychological mind, you don't find a small, solid spiritual entity sitting inside you. You find a vast, infinite emptiness. The host itself disappears along with the guests. All that remains is a pure, unclouded look, a raw witnessing that has no title, no boundary, and no separation. To understand how this spiritual ambition corrupts your natural state of being, meditate deeply on the beautiful story of the monk who approached Master Seijo. The monk asked, I am told that a Buddha who lived in ancient times sat in meditation for 10 cycles of existence, 10 long eons, and yet he could not realize the truth of liberation. Why was this so? Look at the profound weight of this question. A man sits in absolute silence, performing the ultimate austerities, meditating for lifetimes, yet liberation remains far away. He is doing everything right according to the scriptures, practicing the techniques perfectly, yet he is completely stuck. Master Seijo looked at the monk and gave a very shocking, paradoxical answer. He said, because he was a Buddha. Let this answer sink deep into your heart. Why did the ancient seeker fail to realize liberation despite 10 cycles of meditation? Because he was already a Buddha, and he was trying to become a Buddha. This is the ultimate cosmic joke, the most profound paradox of the spiritual journey. How can you find that which you have never lost? How can you become that which you already are? If a rose bush spends its entire life crying, weeping, and performing disciplines to transform itself into a rose bush, it will simply go mad. Its very effort to become a rose bush creates a false division, a phantom distance between its current reality and its projected goal. It closes its eyes to the beautiful roses that are already waiting to bloom within its seeds, choosing instead to focus on a tomorrow that never comes. This is exactly what human beings do when they turn enlightenment into a goal, a future target to be achieved through methods and techniques. Your true nature is already enlightened, already divine, already perfect in its absolute ordinariness. But you have forgotten your true identity. You have fallen into a deep, hypnotic slumber, dreaming that you are a miserable beggar wandering in a dark valley of suffering. Because you feel like a beggar, you start searching frantically for a way out, looking for spiritual paths, maps, and guides. But the very act of seeking takes you further away from the treasure. Seeking implies that the treasure is somewhere else, in another place, at another time, or within another dimension. It forces your consciousness to project itself into the future, disconnecting you from the absolute reality of the present moment. You are like the pilgrim in the ancient Zen parable who rode his horse across treacherous mountains and roaring rivers, spending months searching for a famous wise man to ask him how to find true enlightenment. When he finally located the master in a remote cave, the master looked at him, looked at the majestic steed he was riding, and asked him why he wasn't looking for a horse instead of enlightenment. The pilgrim was completely bewildered and replied, "What nonsense are you talking about? I don't need to look for a horse. The horse is already with me. I am riding it right now." The master simply smiled, closed his eyes, and retreated back into his cave. He had delivered the ultimate blow to the seeking mind. You are already riding the horse of the divine. Your very breath, your very awareness, the very pulse that beats in your heart is the presence of God here and now. You don't need to go anywhere to find it. You don't need to climb the Himalayas. You don't need to fast. And you don't need to torture your body with artificial disciplines. The pathless path of Zen means realizing that there is no distance to travel. All coordinates of time and space are completely irrelevant to your true being. When the brilliant master Joshu was asked by a monk, "What is the great way?" he didn't give a long metaphysical discourse about the cosmos. He simply pointed out the window and said, "It is outside the fence there." The monk was disappointed, feeling that the master was being superficial, and said, "No, I am not asking about that little dirt path outside the fence. I am asking about the great way of truth, the path to God." Joshu laughed and said, "Ah, the great way. That is the one that leads directly to the capital." Joshu was playing with the monk, exposing the foolishness of his seeking mind with immense compassion. He was showing him that the moment you look for a specialized, extraordinary path to the divine, you turn truth into a commodity, a destination in the distance. All paths are linear, and linear movement belongs entirely to the domain of the mind. The mind loves paths because a path gives it a sense of continuity, a project to work on, a timeline to control. It can say, "Today I am here, tomorrow I will be there, and after 20 years of hard work, I will finally reach the goal." This keeps the ego perfectly intact, safely anchored in psychological time. But existence does not move in a straight line. It moves in infinite, eternal circles. This here now contains the whole of eternity. The past is nothing but a memory trace left in your brain, and the future is nothing but an imaginary projection based on that past. There is no other time than now, and there is no other space than here. When you understand this deeply, you see the complete futility of all masochistic, ascetic approaches to spirituality. Look at the story of Vasubandhu, who was widely revered as the holiest man of his time. He was an absolute master of discipline, practicing long hours of prayer, keeping strict fasts, and completely renouncing all physical comforts. The entire society worshipped him because human beings are always intrigued by self-torture. If you indulge in pleasure, society condemns you. If you torture yourself, society bows down to your feet, because your self-torture satisfies their pathological concepts of holiness. But the patriarch Gayatha, an enlightened disciple of the Buddha, saw the deep tragedy of Vasubandhu's lifestyle. He wanted to remove this one-sided, unnatural view of spirituality. Gayatha asked one of Vasubandhu's disciples, "Do you truly believe your teacher will reach Buddhahood through these extreme austerities and earnest disciplines?" The disciple answered with absolute conviction, "Of course. With such immense devotion and sacrifice, how could our great teacher not attain Buddhahood?" Gayatha shook his head with deep compassion and said, "Your teacher is far from the way. However much and however long he continues these artificial practices, it is all nothing but an empty fancy, a grand illusion of the ego." The disciple was shocked and offended and retorted, "Then by what specialized practice does your holiness acquire merit that you dare to criticize our master?" Gayatha replied with absolute, radiant simplicity, "I neither seek the way nor fall into contrary views. I neither humbly worship the Buddha nor become proud. I neither practice long, forced meditations nor become neglectful of awareness. I neither fast nor overeat. I am neither satisfied nor dissatisfied, because there is no desiring mind left within me. This, and only this, is what is called the way." Gayatha's statement is one of the most beautiful and revolutionary declarations in the history of human consciousness. He is pulling religion out of the hands of the priests, the moralists, and the self-torturing ascetics, and bringing it back to its natural, organic essence. He is showing that perfection is not a state of extreme control or artificial cultivation. It is simply a total, relaxed let go that allows existence to flow through you without any hindrance. The natural is divine, and the unnatural is devilish. When you fast excessively, you are fighting against the natural intelligence of your body, depriving it of energy, and turning your mind into a dull, impotent instrument. That is not celibacy, that is not brahmacharya, it is simply starvation, a lack of vitality that prevents the higher centers of your brain from functioning. A true master is one whose energy is fully alive, humming like a perfectly tuned engine, yet completely silent and at rest when it is not needed. This brings us to a question that many traditional, moralistic people find deeply disturbing. Can an alcoholic take sannyas? Can a sinner enter the temple of meditation? Zen says, why not? In fact, an alcoholic is far closer to the religious dimension than a power-hungry politician or a self-righteous moralist. What is the deep, subconscious drive that leads a man to alcohol? It is a hidden, misdirected search for the divine. The alcoholic is utterly exhausted by the heavy burden of his ego, his worries, his social anxieties, and the continuous chattering of his mind. He is looking for a way to escape this inner hell, looking for a door to drop his self-consciousness, even if it is just for a few hours. Alcohol provides a temporary, artificial shortcut to that space. It deflates the balloon of the ego for a brief moment, allowing him to forget his miseries and feel a fleeting sense of relaxation. The problem with alcohol is not that it is evil, but that it is incredibly temporary and carries a heavy physical and psychological cost. It gives you a short loan of peace, and the next morning it returns you to reality with a vengeance, leaving you more hungover, tense, and miserable than before. It is an artificial mechanism of forgetfulness. Religion is also a method to dissolve the ego, but it does so permanently, without any negative side effects. Through the awakening of positive awareness. All traditional religions have historically fought against alcohol because it is their direct competitor in the marketplace. If a man can go to the local pub, drink a few glasses, and instantly feel like an emperor, why should he bother sitting in a cold temple for 20 years listening to dry moral discourses? He has found a cheap, immediate escape. But my approach is not one of prohibition or condemnation. I don't ask you to drop your drinking habits before you take sannyas. I accept you exactly as you are, with all your limitations, your addictions, and your inner wounds. Condemnation has never transformed a single human soul. It only breeds guilt, secrecy, and deeper pathology. If you are an alcoholic, I feel immense compassion for you. I know that life must be getting too heavy for you, that your anxieties must be tearing your nervous system apart, and that you are simply using the only tool you know to find a bit of rest. Sannyas is an invitation to discover the real coin, the ultimate undying intoxication of meditation. When you begin to sit in deep silence, when you learn the art of non-judgmental witnessing, a natural sweetness, an inner nectar begins to flow from the hidden core of your being. This is what the ancient mystics called the wine of the divine. Once you taste this real diamond, once you experience the profound, ecstatic joy that arises out of your own thoughtless awareness, you will look at alcohol and find it completely irrelevant. Why should you chase a cheap, temporary illusion when you have become the owner of the infinite treasure? You don't have to force yourself to drop the bottle. The bottle will simply drop from your hands naturally, without any effort, without any conflict. You become so happy, so deeply intoxicated with your own presence that forgetfulness is no longer required. The same deep understanding must be applied to the realm of human sexuality. For centuries, the followers of traditional religions have preached that sex is a vile sin, a dark door to hell that must be forcefully suppressed if you want to achieve spiritual purity. They have created a massive global pathology around this natural biological energy. Look at the tragic history of the Christian saints and monks who spent their entire lives whipping their own bodies, locking themselves in dark caves, and treating their physical forms as sacks of excrement. What was the result of this intense repression? Their sexuality didn't disappear, it simply became cerebral. It moved out of their genitals and took full possession of their heads, creating a continuous stream of twisted, neurotic fantasies, demonic visions, and psychological madness. When you fight against a natural energy, you give it immense power over your consciousness. You become obsessed with the very thing you are trying to destroy. Sex is the foundational energy of life. It is the force through which the entire universe reproduces itself, through which the birds sing, the flowers bloom, and new life enters the world. It is the raw material out of which your absolute spiritual flowering, your samadhi, must be crafted. You cannot create a beautiful lotus flower if you reject and destroy the rich, dark mud out of which it must grow. The mud is not against the lotus, It is the very nourishment that sustains its exquisite beauty. Zen says that you cannot drop sex through fight or suppression. You can only transcend it through total, uninhibited understanding. When you make love, don't do it mechanically. Don't do it with a sense of guilt or animal urgency. Bring the beautiful light of your meditativeness into the love act. Become a silent witness to the deep flow of energy within your body. Watch the rise of the peak. Watch the absolute merging with the other, and watch the profound valley of relaxation that follows the orgasm. When you live your sexual life naturally, with absolute awareness and deep reverence, a magnificent transformation happens of its own accord. One day, you come to a point of complete saturation where the desire for the physical other simply evaporates. This is not a state of cold indifference or castration. It is the ultimate fulfillment of your inner polarity. Within every man lives an inner woman, and within every woman lives an inner man. As your awareness deepens, your inner masculine and feminine energies enter into a perfect, eternal embrace. This internal cosmic orgasm is what true celibacy, true brahmacharya is all about. You become completely whole within yourself. An emperor who no longer needs to beg for a few moments of pleasure from anyone else. Your sexual energy is not destroyed. It is transfigured into a radiant, unearthly grace that spreads all over your senses, allowing you to see, touch, and experience the entire universe with an intensity you have never known before. This total, unconditional embrace of reality is the very essence of taking sannyas. It is a love affair that cannot be explained through logical arguments or intellectual concepts. It is an existential jump into the stream of trust. When you listen to the teachings with your mind, you gather many small paths and understandings outside the fence. But when you allow yourself to surrender your defenses and become completely vulnerable to the presence of the Master, the pathless path opens wide. You are not choosing a part against the whole. You are choosing the whole through the door of the Master. The Master is a temporary guide, a hand that holds yours until your inner strength is fully reclaimed. To systematically dismantle these deeply ingrained patterns of the mind, to step completely out of the social hypnosis that keeps you small, and to fully reclaim the original, sovereign power of your consciousness, is an extraordinary, life-altering process. It requires a practical, structured approach to inner engineering, a science that shifts you from a state of mechanical reaction to absolute cosmic mastery. For those individuals who feel a profound, burning call to dive deeply into this transformative alchemy, to unlock their hidden potential and stand fully in their authentic divinity, you can explore our comprehensive spiritual guide, the Hidden Energy Protocol, Reclaim Your God Mode, which is available directly through the links provided in the description below. This essential protocol serves as a bridge to help you dissolve the deep-seated psychological armor of the ego, guiding you back to that pristine state of empty innocence where you no longer push the current of life but float effortlessly as a pure expression of the timeless whole. Stop looking for paths in the distance. Stop waiting for a tomorrow that does not exist, and open your eyes to the magnificent, eternal light that is radiating within your own heart here now. And remember, when I say this new being can be born within you, I do not mean an improved version of your old self. The mind always thinks in terms of improvement, modification, and refinement. It wants to take your past, polish it, decorate it, and present it as your future. But a polished ego is still an ego. A refined prisoner is still a prisoner. True transformation is not a gradual evolution. It is a revolution. It is a quantum leap from the old to the new, a total mutation where the past is completely dropped and something entirely fresh, something you could never have planned or imagined, comes into existence. The mind is terrified of this suddenness because it cannot control it. The mind can only function within the known, within the patterns it has already experienced and analyzed. The moment you step into the sudden, the unexpected, the mind completely loses its grip, and in that loss of grip, the divine enters. This is why the path of Zen is called the path of paradox. It demands that you achieve that which you already have, that you find that which was never lost, and that you become that which you already are. To the logical mind, this sounds like absolute nonsense. Logic believes in straight lines, in clear causes and effects, in moving from point A to point B. If you are at point A, logic says you must walk a certain distance to reach point B. But Zen says you are already at point B. You are just dreaming that you are standing at point A and crying out for a map. How can any map help you find the place where you are already sitting? Any map will only take you away from yourself, leading you into endless journeys across imaginary lands. The only way to find your true home is to wake up from the dream of distance, to stop walking, to stop seeking, and to look directly at the reality of this very moment. Have you ever watched how much energy you spend every single day just to maintain your illusions? You are like a person who is constantly running to stay in the same place, completely exhausted by your own inner friction. You carry your past like a heavy sack of stones on your back, constantly looking at your memories, rehearsing your old hurts, and projecting your fears into the future. You are never fully present in anything you do. When you eat, you are thinking about your business. When you are at your office, you are dreaming about your holiday. When you are with your lover, your mind is wandering somewhere else entirely. You live in a state of chronic division, a continuous split that tears your vital energies apart. This division is the true source of your tiredness, your anxiety, and your deep sense of meaninglessness. Life is passing you by, flowing like a golden river right in front of your eyes, but your hands are empty because you are reaching for shadows in the distance. Zen says that to step out of this misery, you do not need to perform grand spiritual disciplines or master complex philosophies. You only need to learn the simple art of looking without judgment. Look at a flower without instantly labeling it as a rose or a lotus. The moment you give it a name, you have substituted the living reality with a dead word. You have closed the book of existence and opened the dictionary of the mind. Look at the clouds moving in the sky. Look at the rain falling on the roof. Look at the people passing by on the street, and remain a pure mirror. Don't say this is good. Don't say that is bad. Don't try to change anything, and don't try to create any definitions. Just watch, just listen, and allow the silence of the universe to penetrate your being. In that non-judgmental awareness, a profound fusion takes place. The hard boundaries of your ego begin to soften. The separation between the observer and the observed begins to melt, and you realize that you are not an isolated island cut off from the world, but an organic part of this magnificent totality. But the moment you come close to this beautiful silence, the mind panics. It experiences this stillness as a threat to its very survival, a great death that it must avoid at all costs. This panic is what the ancient masters called the great doubt. It is a state of intense trembling and anxiety that arises when the old, comfortable structures of your personality begin to collapse. But the new consciousness has not yet become completely clear. You feel as if you are suspended in limbo, hanging over a vast, bottomless abyss, with nothing to hold on to and nowhere to plant your feet. In that moment of terror, your natural instinct is to run backward, to cling to your old chains, your old miseries, and your old concepts, because they feel familiar and safe. But Zen tells you that there is no way backward. Growth is a point of no return. Once you have seen the futility of your illusions, you can never truly believe in them again. You must have the immense courage to let go of the shore, to fall into the abyss, and to trust that the emptiness itself will catch you and transform you. This emptiness is not a negative void, not a mere absence of things. It is what Buddha called shunyata, a pregnant, alive nothingness that is the very source of all existence. Think of a dark room that is completely full of furniture, cluttered with boxes, chairs, and tables. If you remove all the furniture outside, you say the room is now empty. But what do you mean by empty? You only mean it is empty of furniture. In reality, the room is now completely full of space, full of roominess, full of itself. Before, the space was obstructed, divided, and confined by the heavy objects inside. Now that the clutter has been thrown away, the space enjoys its absolute freedom and fullness. Your consciousness is exactly like that room. Right now, it is cluttered with the junk of your thoughts, your ambitions, your identities, and your social conditionings. You think you are full of life, but you are only full of garbage. When you clean your inner house through meditation, when you throw away the furniture of the ego, you enter the state of shunyata. You become empty of the other, empty of illusions, but perfectly full of your own authentic being. To experience this fullness, you must understand that existence is fundamentally a verb, not a noun. Our languages are rooted in nouns, which creates a deep misunderstanding about the nature of reality. We look at a river and we think of it as a solid object, a noun called a river. But Buddha says, there is no river, there is only a constant process of flowing. If you stop the flowing, the river instantly disappears. We look at a tree and we think of it as a noun, but in reality, it is a continuous process of growing, greening, and blooming. Even your own identity is not a noun. You are not a fixed, unchanging entity called a person. You are a dynamic process of living, breathing, and experiencing. There is no thinker inside your head. There is only a stream of thinking. There is no runner. There is only the action of running. The concept of a solid, permanent self is nothing but an invention of the memory, a thread that we use to tie the separate, atomic moments of our experiences together into a neat little bundle that we call the ego. When you look closely at this process, the human urge to judge everything through comparison begins to look completely absurd. You spend your entire life comparing yourself with others, constantly falling into the trap of feeling either superior or inferior. If you see someone who has more money, more fame, or more beauty than you, your ego shrinks and you feel a deep sense of humiliation and insufficiency. If you see someone who is behind you in the race, your ego swells with pride and arrogance. To escape this painful duality, some people adopt the ideal of equality, claiming that all human beings are equal. But Zen says that equality is just another trick of the same measuring mind. Why equal? To say two things are equal means you are still using the same benchmark, the same linear scale of comparison. The truth of existence is that each individual is absolutely unique. Comparison is simply impossible because there are no two identical entities anywhere in the universe. God never repeats himself. He does not believe in carbon copies. He only creates originals. You cannot compare a rose with a lotus. You cannot compare the sun with the moon, and you cannot compare a mountain with an ocean. Each has its own intrinsic beauty, its own unique expression, its own absolute value. The moment comparison disappears from your consciousness, true compassion arises. You no longer look at people with judgment. You no longer try to place them in rows or hierarchies, and you no longer try to hide your own uniqueness behind artificial masks. You accept yourself completely, with all your lights and shadows, and you accept others with the same profound reverence. You stop trying to become someone else, and you simply enjoy the exquisite privilege of being yourself here and now. Look at how much frustration arises when you treat enlightenment as a distant target to be achieved through hard work and technique. You turn the pathless path into a battlefield, constantly struggling against yourself, constantly waiting for a future explosion of bliss. You are like a man who is running furiously to catch his own shadow. The faster you run, the faster the shadow moves ahead of you. No matter how much speed you gain, you can never close the gap because the shadow is connected to your very body. If you want to catch your shadow, you don't need to run. You only need to stop, look at the sun, and the shadow falls flat on the ground behind you, completely powerless. Your desires are your shadow. The more you chase spiritual states, the further they recede from your grasp. Stop the running, drop the achieving mind, turn your vision toward the inner light of your own witness, and the shadow of discontent instantly vanishes. This stillness of the witness is the ultimate sanctuary, the center of the cyclone where nothing ever moves, nothing ever changes, and nothing can ever be destroyed. The world around you will continue its chaotic dance. Your body will pass through its natural cycles of health and decay, and your thoughts will move like ripples on the surface of an ocean. But at your very core, you remain the eternal, unclouded mirror, mirroring everything exactly as it is, without ever collecting a single speck of dust. To awaken to this mirror-like quality is to live with true grace. To transcend the limitations of life and death and to claim your original sovereignty as a pure expression of the ultimate whole. It is a state of absolute, elegant simplicity, where you have nothing to prove, nothing to gain, and nothing to lose. You live your life as a beautiful, unmotivated celebration, sharing your fragrance with the universe simply because your heart is overflowing with the divine nectar of your own presence. This magnificent transformation requires a deep, uncompromising commitment to self-discovery, a willingness to step completely out of the mechanical ruts of the mind and explore the hidden potential of your inner architecture. To assist you in systematically dismantling the false concepts of the ego and unlocking the true sovereign power of your consciousness, we have created an essential guide that serves as a practical science for your awakening. You can easily access this specialized protocol titled the Hidden Energy Protocol, Reclaim Your God Mode, through the links available in the description below, allowing you to deepen your meditation, dissolve your psychological boundaries, and flow effortlessly as a pure manifestation of the eternal here now. Drop the heavy burden of your seeking mind. Stop looking for answers in the distance and allow yourself to relax into the profound, empty silence of your own authentic being. And this relaxation into your own non-existence is not a passive withdrawal from the world. It is the awakening of an entirely new dimension of intelligence. You have been taught by your society that intelligence means the capacity to argue, to memorize, to analyze, and to manipulate concepts. But that is not intelligence. That is merely intellectual expertise. It is a mechanical skill of the brain, a sophisticated software that you have installed through years of schooling and university training. True intelligence is something far deeper, far more luminous. It is the capacity to respond to the living reality of the present moment without the interference of your past knowledge. It is a spontaneous clarity that arises only when the mind is completely empty of chattering defenses, plans, and games. Look at how your so-called knowledge acts as a thick, opaque screen between you and existence. When you look at a tree, you don't actually see the tree. You see your concept of the tree. Your mind immediately whispers, "This is an oak. This is a pine. This is beautiful. This is old." The moment you name it, you have closed your eyes to the living mystery that stands before you. You have reduced a unique, infinite expression of the divine into a dead word in your psychological dictionary. Zen says that to see the tree as it really is, you must drop the word, drop the concept, and allow your consciousness to become a pure mirror. When the mirror is clean, the tree is reflected in its absolute purity, with its greenness, its texture, its unique shape, and its silent music. In that reflection, there is no division between you and the tree. You don't say, "I am looking at the tree." There is only a pure state of looking, an organic fusion where the observer and the observed melt into one. This direct, non-conceptual experience of reality is what the ancient masters called the awakening of your original nature. It is a state of profound simplicity, a return to the innocent eyes of childhood, but with the full brilliance of absolute awareness. Society is terrified of this simplicity because a simple person cannot be manipulated. A simple person cannot be driven by greed, ambition, or political propaganda. He is completely content in his own being, perfectly happy with the ordinary joys of life. He enjoys the sunshine, the rain, the sound of the wind in the trees, and the company of a friend. He has no desire to become a Rockefeller, a Hitler, or a famous celebrity. He has dropped the mad game of competition and stepped entirely out of the global marketplace. Because he has no ambition, he has no fear, and because he has no fear, he is completely free. To understand how the mind traps you in complexity, you must look at the deep-seated mechanisms of fear and greed. Fear and greed are the two wheels on which the cart of the mind moves through the world. They are completely interdependent, feeding on each other in a continuous vicious circle. Your greed is nothing but an attempt to protect yourself from your fear. You feel a deep, underlying anxiety about your mortality, your insignificance, and your ultimate loneliness in this vast universe. To cover up this fear, to create a false sense of security, you start accumulating things. You accumulate money, property, titles, power, and relationships. You build a massive wall of possessions around yourself, hoping that this wall will shield you from death and meaninglessness. But the wall cannot protect you. It can only imprison you. The more you accumulate, the more terrified you become of losing what you have gathered. Your security creates a new layer of insecurity. Your protection creates a new layer of anxiety, and you find yourself caught in a continuous, exhausting battle against reality. Look at the absolute tragedy of the righteous person, the moralistic person who has turned his virtue into an ego trip. He has renounced material wealth. Perhaps he has shaved his head, put on religious robes, and entered a monastery. He follows all the rules of his scriptures perfectly, practices long hours of meditation, keeps strict fasts, and prides himself on his absolute purity. He looks down on the ordinary, worldly mortals around him with a subtle sense of condemnation and superiority. He thinks he is a saint, close to God, destined for the highest paradise. But Zen says that this righteousness is the ultimate mask of the ego, a refined and pious delusion that keeps the soul deeply enslaved. This is the profound meaning behind the legendary encounter between the first Zen master, Bodhidharma, and the Emperor Wu of China. Emperor Wu was a deeply religious man who had dedicated his entire wealth and power to the service of Buddhism. He had built thousands of magnificent temples, fed millions of monks, supported countless scholars translating scriptures into Chinese, and converted his entire kingdom into a Buddhist land. Naturally, he was feeling extremely proud of his immense spiritual merits. When Bodhidharma arrived in China, the emperor went to receive him with great ceremony and said, "Sir, I have built so many temples, supported so many monks, and spread the teachings of the Buddha across my entire empire. What will my merit be in the eyes of the divine?" Bodhidharma looked ferociously into the emperor's eyes and delivered a devastating blow. He said, "Nothing, sir. No merit at all. In fact, you will fall into the seventh hell." The emperor was completely shattered. He could not believe his ears. All the other monks and scholars who had come before Bodhidharma had praised him as the greatest, most virtuous ruler in history, treating him like a living saint. And here comes this wild, bearded master, looking like a barbarian, telling him that his grand spiritual achievements are worth nothing and that he is heading straight to hell. The emperor tried to contain his anger and asked, "Why do you say such a shocking thing? What is true virtue then? What is holy merit?" Bodhidharma replied with absolute, icy clarity, "Emptiness, just emptiness. There is nothing holy in it. Emptiness is simply empty." The emperor, still trying to bring his logical concepts back into the conversation, asked, "If everything is empty, then who is standing before me right now?" Bodhidharma shrugged his shoulders and said, "I don't know." He then turned his back on the emperor, walked away into the mountains, and spent the next 9 years staring at a stone wall in a remote cave. This dialogue is one of the greatest moments in the history of human consciousness. Bodhidharma was shattering the ultimate delusion of the spiritual ego. He was showing Emperor Wu that all his grand religious acts, his charities, and his temples were coming out of a desire to accumulate merit for his own ego. He was using religion as an investment for the future, a way to secure a front row seat in heaven, and the ego is the very door to hell. It does not matter whether your ego is built on material wealth or spiritual virtue, as long as the feeling of "I am the doer" remains. You are completely cut off from the reality of existence. True virtue is not an accumulation of good deeds. It is the absolute disappearance of the doer. It is a state of pure emptiness, a clean mirror that reflects the divine without claiming ownership over the reflection. The emperor could not understand Bodhidharma in that moment. He was too deeply entrenched in his dreams of spiritual success. But the image of that fierce, authentic master continued to haunt him like a nightmare. As he lay dying on his deathbed 7 years later, the illusion of his grand achievements finally began to crumble. He looked back at his life and realized that death was coming to rob him of everything, and that all his temples and merits could not save his separate identity from total annihilation. He called his ministers and said, "Hurry into the mountains and find Bodhidharma. He was the only real man I ever encountered, the only one who had the immense compassion to tell me the brutal truth to my face. I realize now that it was all an ego trip, and I am terrified of the emptiness that is engulfing me. Let his words be engraved on my tombstone so that future generations will know the truth." But it was too late. By the time they reached the cave, the emperor had already passed away. One single moment of real understanding, even on your deathbed, is worth more than thousands of lifetimes spent in righteous, moralistic living. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "The righteousness of the righteous is not enough. Something more is required, something that goes far beyond conscience, rules, and codes of conduct. Consciousness is required. Conscience is given to you by your society. It is an internalized police officer that tells you what is acceptable and what is not, keeping you operating as a predictable, well-behaved mechanism. But consciousness belongs to your own essential nature. It is your unique capacity to see, to witness, and to respond to life with total authenticity. A person who operates from conscience is always divided, always calculating, always trying to fit into a mold. A person who operates from consciousness is completely integrated, a solid piece of reality that moves in perfect tune with the universe. Look at how the mind rationalizes its actions to protect itself from its own fears. When you do something wrong, you immediately generate 1,001 elaborate explanations to justify your behavior. You say, "The circumstances were difficult. The situation was out of my control. I had no other choice." You minimize your mistakes and make them look small, insignificant, and accidental. On the other hand, when you do a small, ordinary act of kindness, you magnify it until it looks like a grand cosmic achievement. You help a beggar on the street and you carry that memory for weeks, feeling like a noble savior of humanity. This continuous distortion of perspective creates a deep psychological fog within your consciousness. You lose the ability to see things as they really are, in their actual size and shape. Your entire world becomes an illusory matrix of fictions, projections, and rationalizations. I have heard a beautiful story about how Zen creates psychological situations to shock you out of this mental fog. Zen is deeply psychological, operating as an alarm clock that hits you directly in the heart to wake you from your deep slumber. A young man who had suffered a bitter, devastating disappointment in his life went to a remote monastery nestled deep in the mountains. He approached the master and said, "Sir, I am completely disillusioned with the world. I have experienced nothing but suffering, betrayal, and heartbreak, and I wish to attain enlightenment to be permanently freed from these miseries. But I must be honest with you, I have no capacity for long, tedious disciplines. I can never sit for years in silent meditation. I cannot study dry scriptures, and I cannot tolerate severe physical austerities. My mind is too restless. I would inevitably relapse and be drawn right back into the world, painful though I know it to be. Is there any shortcut, any immediate way for a person like me?" The master looked at him with great attention and said, "There is a way. If you are truly determined, tell me, what have you concentrated on most in your life? What is the one thing you have mastered, the one thing you have given your entire focus to?" The youth looked down, a bit embarrassed, and said, "To be honest, nothing useful. My family was very wealthy, so I never had to work a single day in my life. The only thing I ever spent my time on was the game of chess. I focused intensely on that. It is the only thing I truly understand." The master thought for a single moment, turned to his attendant, and said, "Call a certain monk to this hall and tell him to bring a chessboard and the chess pieces." The attendant looked puzzled and said, "But sir, that particular monk does not know how to play chess at all. He has spent his whole life in prayer and manual labor." The master waved his hand and said, "Do not worry about that. Simply call him here immediately." The monk arrived, carrying the chessboard, and set up the pieces between the young man and himself. Then the master did something completely unexpected. He reached into his robe, pulled out a sharp, naked sword, and placed it right beside the chessboard. He looked at the monk and said, "O monk, you have taken a vow of absolute obedience to me as your master, and now the moment has come for you to fulfill that vow. You will play a game of chess with this youth. If you lose this game, I shall personally cut off your head with this sword." The monk was stunned. He looked at the master's face and saw an absolute, unyielding intensity. He knew his master was not joking. He meant every single word. If he lost, his life was finished. To put a monk who barely knew the rules of the game against a wealthy youth who had spent his entire life mastering chess was an absolute death warrant. Then the master turned to the young man and said, "And as for you, young man, chess is the only thing you have ever tried hard at in your life. If you lose this game to a monk who does not even know how to play, it means you are a complete failure and you deserve to lose your head as well. If you win, I shall cut off the head of this monk. But I promise you, monk, that if you die by my hand in absolute obedience, you will be instantly reborn in paradise." The young man and the monk looked at the naked sword gleaming in the master's hand. They looked at his eyes, and a terrifying realization gripped their souls. This was a matter of immediate life and death. The game began. In the first few moves, the young man, driven by the intense, primal instinct for survival, played with absolute ferocity. His mind had never been so focused in his entire existence. All his past disappointments, his heartbreaks, his illusions about the world, and his thoughts about the future completely vanished. There was no room for chattering, no room for daydreams, no room for distractions. The entire universe had shrunk down to the 64 squares of the chessboard. He was playing for his very neck. He launched a brilliant, aggressive attack, sweeping through the monk's defenses, capturing his pieces one by one until the monk was cornered into a helpless position. The game was almost over. The monk was just one move away from absolute defeat. But as the young man raised his hand to make the final lethal move that would seal the monk's doom, he happened to look up. He looked across the board and saw the monk's face. The monk was sitting in absolute serenity. Sweat was pouring down his forehead. His hands were trembling slightly, yet his eyes were completely peaceful, filled with a quiet, beautiful state of surrender. He was not angry. He was not terrified. He had simply accepted his fate in total devotion to his master. Suddenly, a profound shift happened within the young man's heart. A wave of intense compassion rushed through his entire being. He thought to himself, "This poor monk has done nothing wrong. He has spent his whole life in silent service, in prayer, and in absolute purity. My own life has been completely useless, a waste of wealth, full of shallow pleasures and bitter complaints. Why should this beautiful, innocent soul die just so that a worthless person like me can go on living?" In that moment of deep compassion, the youth made a conscious decision. He decided to intentionally misplay his pieces, to commit a tactical blunder that would allow the monk to turn the tables, win the game, and save his life. He deliberately moved his knight into a vulnerable position, waiting for the monk to strike. But the master had been watching everything with absolute penetration. Before the monk could make his move, the master suddenly reached out, kicked the chessboard over, scattering the pieces all across the room, and sheathed his sword. He looked at the young man, laughed with immense joy, and said, "Well done. The game is finished. Neither of you has lost, and both of you have won." Then, turning specifically to the youth, the master said, "You came here asking for a shortcut to enlightenment, and today you have received the foundational lesson. In this single hour, you have experienced the two essential pillars of awakening. First, when your life was on the line, you learned absolute concentration. Your mind became perfectly still, perfectly here now, completely free of the past and the future. Second, when you looked at the monk's face, you moved from concentration to total selflessness. You became willing to sacrifice your own ego, your own physical life, for the sake of another. Go back to your room. You no longer need long years of dry study or artificial disciplines. You have tasted the essence of Zen. This parable contains the entire psychology of the awakening process. Zen does not give you intellectual concepts to memorize. It creates live situations that force you to confront your reality directly. The young man's concentration was not a cultivated discipline. It was a spontaneous response to a situation of life and death. And his compassion was not an artificial, moralistic duty. It was a natural outpouring of his being when his ego completely dissolved in the face of the monk's innocence. When concentration and compassion meet, the separate identity is instantly shattered, and what remains is the pure, undying witness. Look at how the mind is always trying to turn everything into an artificial technique. You hear about concentration, and you start practicing it mechanically. You sit in a room, you stare at a black dot on the wall, or you repeat a mantra for hours, forcing your mind to stay focused. You think that by forcing the mind into a tight corner, you are achieving spiritual stillness. But that is not stillness. That is simply self-hypnosis. You are dulling your brain, creating a state of inner stupor, a negative stagnation that leaves you completely insensitive to the living reality around you. A forced silence is a dead silence, a silence of the graveyard. It has no joy, no creativity, no fragrance. A true master does not fight with the mind, he invokes the witness. Witnessing is entirely different from concentration. concentration is an act of the ego, an aggressive effort to exclude everything else and focus on a single point. It requires tension, willpower, and continuous conflict against the natural flow of your thoughts. But witnessing is completely relaxed, non-exclusive, and effortless. It is like standing on top of a hill, looking down at a beautiful valley, watching the rivers flow, the birds fly, the trees wave in the wind, and the clouds pass by in the sky. You are not against anything. You are not trying to stop anything, and you are not choosing one thing over another. You are simply present, a radiant space of empty awareness that reflects the entire panorama of existence without getting attached to any part of it. When you sit in this silent watchfulness, parallel to the chattering mind, something beautifully new begins to arise within your consciousness. A new center of gravity is born, a higher vantage point that is completely independent of your psychological mechanism. The mind may continue to spin its thoughts, memories, and desires on its own superficial plane, that is its mechanical nature, its survival function, but you are no longer entangled in its web. You are sitting on the hills, looking down at the traffic in the valley with immense friendliness and detachment. You realize that you are the watcher, not the traffic. The moment this realization becomes rooted in your being, you become the absolute master of your life. You no longer need to fight with your thoughts or force your mind to be silent. The very presence of the master is enough to bring the servant into a state of deep, respectful quietness. You simply look at the chattering mind and say, "Halt," and it halts instantly, because the slave recognizes the voice of the true sovereign. To experience this magnificent restoration of your inner divinity, to systematically dismantle the thick layers of social hypnosis and conditioning that keep you bound to a life of mechanical reaction, requires an absolute commitment to the practical science of inner alchemy. This profound awakening is not about gathering more external knowledge or adopting new spiritual labels. It is about reclaiming your absolute alignment with the organic wholeness of the universe. For those rare and courageous individuals who feel a deep, burning call to step entirely out of the matrix of the ego and stand fully in their pristine sovereignty, a detailed and practical map of this transformative journey is available for your exploration. You can find our specialized evolutionary protocol titled The Hidden Energy Protocol, Reclaim Your God Mode, accessible directly through the explicit links provided in the description below. This essential compilation is meticulously designed to support your process of unlearning, helping you to dissolve the deeply ingrained psychological armor of the mind, so that you can relax your grip on misery, transcend the illusions of time, and flow effortlessly as a pure, undying manifestation of the eternal here now. Stop chasing phantoms in the distance, drop the mad game of becoming, and allow your consciousness to settle into the exquisite, peaceful emptiness of your own true nature. And when your consciousness settles into this beautiful, pristine emptiness, you naturally enter a state that the world can never understand. When Chichang returned down from the misty peaks of the mountains, after spending 9 long silent years with the ancient hermit Kanying, the inhabitants of his city were completely struck with amazement. They looked at his face, expecting to see the fierce, sharp, steel-like glare of the greatest warrior on earth. They expected an unyielding countenance, an intense aura of absolute mastery, and a proud posture that would match his global ambition. But all of that was gone. The old, resolute, and arrogant expression had vanished entirely into the pure mountain air. In its place had come the look of a simpleton, a plain idiot, a beautiful fool, who seemed to know nothing at all. When his former teacher, Wei Fei, came to visit him and looked into those vacant, innocent eyes, he instantly understood what had transpired. Without a single trace of hesitation, Wei Fei bowed down flat on the earth and said, "Now I see that you have indeed become an expert, and such as I are no longer worthy ever to touch your feet." The inhabitants of his city hailed him as the absolute champion, the greatest archer in the entire world, and they waited with immense, burning impatience for the wonderful feats and miraculous displays of skill that he would undoubtedly soon show them. But Chichang did absolutely nothing to satisfy their shallow expectations. The grand poplar bough that he had proudly taken with him on his long journey into the mountains had been completely left behind. He didn't even carry a weapon anymore. When someone, deeply perplexed by this choice, asked him to explain why he no longer held his bow, he answered in a remarkably soft, languid, and detached tone. The ultimate stage of activity is inactivity. The ultimate stage of speaking is to refrain from speech, and the ultimate stage in shooting is not to shoot at all. This state of being a simpleton is the highest peak of human consciousness. It is the ultimate goal of both Tao and Zen to return to a state of mindless innocence where you look like a complete fool to the calculated, cunning world. It was exactly like this that it happened to Saint Francis of Assisi, who was loved and mocked as a simpleton of God. It is the very essence of the teachings of Lao Tzu, Chuang Tzu, and Lie Tzu. In the vision of Tao, to become a simpleton is to enter the domain of true wisdom, because it means you no longer possess a mind that splits reality into bits and pieces. You have become completely empty of intellectual dust, completely ignorant of worldly strategies, and that ignorance is incredibly intimate, beautifully pure. When all your separate selves have vanished, there is only an absolute silence. You don't know anything, because you are no longer there to play the role of the knower. An ordinary idiot is someone who is below the mind, someone whose brain has not yet developed the capacity to operate in the marketplace. But a sage who looks like a simpleton is someone who has gone far above the mind. He has traveled through all the complex ruts of intellect. He has mastered all the sophisticated games of language, and he has consciously chosen to peel away every single layer of that artificial accumulation until nothing but pure, unclouded emptiness is left. He is an idiot by choice, a holy fool who has returned to his original face. To the worldly eye, which only values aggression, calculation, and cleverness, such a man looks completely useless, completely blank, but his ordinariness is sublimely extraordinary. He has nowhere to go, no goal to achieve, and no target to shoot. He has dropped the entire desiring mind with all its multi-layered mechanisms. As Chi Chang grew old in his city, he seemed to enter deeper and deeper into this state where both mind and body looked no longer to things outside, but existed entirely by themselves in a restful, elegant, and majestic simplicity. His solid face divested itself of every single vestige of expression. No outside force, no praise, and no condemnation could disturb his complete impassiveness. It was exceedingly rare now for him to speak at all, and presently one could no longer even tell whether or not he was still breathing. In the twilight evening of his life, he had completely forgotten the difference between this and that. The vast, shifting kaleidoscope of sensory impressions no longer concerned his inner witness. For all he cared, his eye might have been an ear, his ear a nose, his nose a mouth. All the neat little pigeonholes of language, all the intellectual categories of the logical brain had dissolved into a singular, undivided ocean of experiencing. Of his final year on this earth, a magnificent story is told that highlights the absolute peak of his realization. One day, he went to visit an old friend's house and saw lying on a wooden table a vaguely familiar utensil whose name he could not recall. He looked at it for a long time, trying to find a trace of it in his memory, but the mirror of his mind was completely clean, free of any dead concepts. He turned to his friend and said in a beautiful, simple tone, "Pray tell me, that object sitting on your table, what is it called, and for what purpose is it used?" His friend stood there completely paralyzed, his eyes wide with shock. He thought Chichang was playing a joke, but as he looked into those vacant, crystal clear eyes, he realized that the master truly did not know. The friend stammered out in an awe-struck, trembling tone, "Oh, Master, you must indeed be the greatest master of all times, for only a person who has reached the absolute ultimate realization can have completely forgotten the bow, both its name and its use." Think of the profound beauty of this forgetfulness. This man had spent his entire youth desiring to become the greatest archer on earth. He had crawled under his wife's loom for 2 years, staring at the rushing treadle without blinking until his eyes were like steel. He had stared at a tiny insect for 3 years until it looked as big as a horse. He had raised his bow against his own teacher, ready to commit murder just to be number one in the queue. His entire ego, his entire life, and his entire identity had been completely bound to the bow. And now he looks at it and doesn't even recognize what it is. The technique had been so thoroughly absorbed that the tool was no longer needed, and when the tool is no longer needed, it disappears from the memory entirely. The archer had completely dissolved into the art, and when the creator dissolves into the creation, there is no longer any separation left. The story concludes by saying that for some time after this event in the city, painters threw away their brushes, musicians broke the strings of their instruments, and carpenters were deeply ashamed to be seen carrying their rules. They realized that their art was still an effort, still a technique, still a performance of the ego. They were still using tools to create reflections, while this simpleton had become the reality itself. When you are still practicing your art, you are on the periphery. The day your art becomes your very being, you forget all about it. A true dancer does not think about the steps. The steps happen on their own, and a moment comes where the dancer disappears and only the dance remains. A true mystic does not practice meditation. He has become meditation itself. This directly addresses a question that many creative minds struggle with. What about the relationship between art and enlightenment? When you are creating a poem, painting a canvas, sculpting a stone, or composing a melody, you can feel an incredible closeness to the meditative state. You feel a sense of alignment, a deep silence descending upon you, yet you can also feel that it is not pure nothingness because it still has an end, a goal, a desire to produce something. It also has a powerful tendency to enhance the ego. The artist wants to sign his name at the bottom of the canvas. He wants to leave a permanent footprint in the world, to achieve immortality through his work. So the question arises, won't you ultimately have to transcend this kind of creativity? The reality is that art depends entirely on you. If your inner being is pathological, your art will be deeply pathological. If your inner being is enlightened, your art will be beautifully enlightened. The art you produce simply carries your unique quality, making your hidden subjectivity visible to the world. Look at the paintings of Picasso. They are masterfully executed, yet they are profoundly pathological. They reflect a deeply fractured, broken, and neurotic mind. They represent the sickness, the tension, and the structural chaos of modern society. If you keep a Picasso painting in your bedroom, you will inevitably begin to have nightmares because you are staring at a yantra of neurosis, a visual pattern that vibrates with inner conflict. It is a known fact that if Picasso or Van Gogh had been prevented from painting, they would have gone completely insane much sooner. For them, art was a form of catharsis, a therapeutic outlet to throw out the madness that was boiling inside their heads. 99% of the art you see in the world today is subjective art of this kind. It comes out of tension, out of frustration, out of an ego need to prove oneself. The artist is continuously fighting to pave his way, continuously competing, and therefore he lives in a state of chronic anxiety and mental suffering. But the ancient mystic Gurdjieff used to divide art into two completely different categories: subjective art and objective art. Objective art does not come from a conflicted mind. It flows directly out of the deep lake of samadhi, out of absolute inner emptiness and harmony. When you look at a piece of objective art, like the magnificent caves of Ajanta and Ellora, the grand sculptures of Khajuraho, the majestic architecture of the Taj Mahal, or a simple, empty Zen painting, you experience a totally different phenomenon. You don't see the ego signature of the creator. You don't feel any tension or neurosis. Instead, as you look at it, a deep, radiant silence begins to arise within your own heart. The pattern of the artwork serves as a visual meditation, a mandala that automatically aligns your internal energies, transporting you into a world of pure peace, grace, and beatitude. The same thing happens when you listen to ancient classical music or classical Sanskrit chants like the Bhagavad Gita. Even if you don't understand a single word of the language, the pure tonality, the melodic rhythm, and the precise vibration of the sound immediately slow down your chattering mind, causing hidden flowers to blossom within your soul. Art in itself has nothing to do directly with enlightenment, but enlightenment has everything to do with art. When a person reaches his innermost core, when he arrives at his true home, he is filled with such an abundance of divine energy that it naturally begins to overflow. He cannot contain it. It is a beautiful, unstoppable outpouring of grace. But the way this energy expresses itself depends entirely on the unique potentiality that the individual carries. Enlightenment becomes a rider on your natural talents, using them as a vehicle to share its fragrance with the world. When Gautama the Buddha became enlightened, his expression was through the spoken word, through grandfatherly discourses of pure reason and silence. He never danced, he never sang, he never painted, because that was not his natural potentiality. Yet, if you look closely, the very way he sits under the Bodhi tree is a sublime poem, and the way he walks gracefully through the villages is a sacred dance. When Meera arrived at the same source, her expression was through ecstatic dancing and singing. She could not sit silently like a statue. Different masters will express the divine in completely different ways, but for an enlightened person, the expression is as natural, as effortless, and as unmotivated as breathing. An enlightened artist has no desire to prove anything to the world, no need to compete, and no ambition to leave a signature. If thousands of people gather to listen to his song or view his painting, it is good. If he is left completely alone in a dark, lonely forest, it is also perfectly good. He is like a wild rose blooming in the deep wilderness, releasing its exquisite perfume to the passing winds, never caring whether anyone walks by to praise its beauty or acknowledge its existence. The act of expression is its own complete reward, fully unmotivated, completely free of tension. This understanding of natural expression brings us directly to another question that deeply troubles the moralistic mind. If man's erotic instincts were fully liberated, would they not run wild and destroy the fabric of civilized society? First of all, let me ask you, what is wrong with being a little wild? To be too much civilized is to become completely plastic, completely artificial and dead. A plastic flower is permanent. It never decays. It is highly civilized and well behaved, but it lacks life, it lacks fragrance, it lacks reality. A wild rose blooming on a thorn bush is fragile. It may be gone by the evening, yet it is beautifully alive, vibrating with the pulse of existence. Look at the wild animals in the forest. They possess a radiant aliveness, a magnificent grace, and a solid presence of the divine that is completely missing in modern, over-civilized human beings. In a sane and healthy world, we would maintain a beautiful balance between civilization and wildness. If your wildness is not violent to anyone, if it does not interfere with another person's freedom, life, or liberty, then it is perfectly religious, completely innocent. The function of the state, the law, and the police should be strictly negative, never positive. They should only tell you what you should not do, such as committing violence or trespassing on another's freedom, and everything else should be left completely open, giving you total freedom to live and express your life according to your own unique nature. But our societies have become positive dictators, constantly telling you how you must act, how you must think, how you must dress, and how you must love. They have turned human beings into predictable, mechanical puppets. Second, you must understand that Eros is the very root of everything that is beautiful, creative, and alive in this universe. The flowers bloom because of the movement of Eros. The cuckoos cry in the spring because of Eros. The birds dance and sing because of Eros. The entire existence is a profoundly erotic phenomenon, filled with a multi-dimensional desire to connect, to create, and to blossom. Even the highest state of consciousness, samadhi, is nothing but the ultimate, supreme flowering of the very same energy that we call Eros. The day human beings started listening to the poison of the priests and politicians who preached against Eros, humanity fell into a deep state of psychological abnormality. Because the natural creative energy of sex was crushed, repressed, and condemned as an absolute sin, it turned sour inside our systems. It became a bitter, poisonous force. When you dam up a natural flowing river and refuse to give it a creative outlet, the water becomes stagnant, foul, and destructive. It breaks through the banks in violent, catastrophic ways. All the wars, the horrific violence, the ruthless political competition, the mad money mania, and the power politics that have plagued human history are nothing but the perversions of repressed erotic energy. An ambitious politician who is intoxicated with power, a warmonger like Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, or Genghis Khan, these are the truly dangerous, pathological people in the world. Their joy is pure destruction, because their creative eros has been completely castrated. Adolf Hitler was a highly disciplined man according to traditional moral standards. He never smoked. He never drank alcohol. He was a strict vegetarian, and he woke up early every morning to fulfill his duties. His public character was absolutely flawless, as perfect as any Mahatma's. Yet, Because his natural life energies were completely repressed, he became a murderous monster who led the world to the brink of absolute annihilation. If he had been a little lazy, if he had enjoyed drinking wine, or if he had been passionately in love with a woman, the world would have been far better off. He would have been too busy enjoying life to bother launching a global slaughterhouse. Humanity has never suffered from eros. It has suffered immensely from the anti-eros mindset. When you are against eros, thanatos, the death instinct becomes your hidden god. You start worshipping dead objects, dead rules, and dead moral idols. If man's erotic instincts were suddenly given total, unconditional freedom today, they might run a little wild for a very brief, transitory period. But the cause of that temporary wildness is not in eros itself. The cause lies entirely with the priests and popes who have starved humanity for thousands of years. If you keep a man locked in a room and starve him for years, and then suddenly hand him the keys to the kitchen, he is going to behave like a wild animal for a few days. He will overeat, he will obsess over food, and his mind will dream of nothing else. But his behavior is a reaction to the starvation, not a reflection of natural hunger. The rulers of society have systematically destroyed human eros because a man whose erotic energy is fully alive and flowering can never be turned into a slave. A person who is deeply in love with life, who is enjoying the absolute ecstasy of his own natural being here now, simply cannot be manipulated. He will never go to fight in a foolish war. He will never care about becoming the prime minister or the president of a country, and he will never go to bow down before a hypocritical priest in a temple. Love is his only prayer, and life is his only temple. To create submissive, compliant citizens who are willing to work like machines and march into battle like robots, society must castrate them psychologically. Look at the difference between a bull and an ox. A bull is a magnificent specimen of pure life, divine energy, and absolute power. It is so vibrant that in India it is worshipped as the bodyguard of the god Shiva. But an ox is a castrated bull. It has been robbed of its erotic freedom, and as a result it becomes a weak, submissive slave that spends its entire life pulling a heavy bullock cart under the lash of a whip. Modern human beings are living like oxen because their natural instincts have been perverted from the very beginning. In the future, if humanity is to survive and become truly healthy, Eros must be recognized as the ultimate religion because Eros is creativity, and creativity is the only true way to connect with the ultimate creator. You can only be truly happy when your life energy flows in its natural, spontaneous way. Joy is not a distant goal that you reach at the end of a long, arduous journey. It is a natural phenomenon that is available to you right here, right now, whenever you drop your inner resistance. And the final, most fundamental truth about this energy is that it can only be transcended when it has been lived completely, without any inhibition, taboo, or guilt. Anything that you live totally is naturally left behind through deep understanding. If you repress your sexuality, it becomes cerebral. It leaves your body and takes full possession of your head, keeping you permanently trapped in a vicious loop of frustration. When you live your life naturally, with absolute awareness and non-judgmental witnessing, a moment comes where the physical desire simply disappears of its own accord. It is not a victory of willpower. It is a natural flowering of your consciousness. Your inner man and inner woman meet in a perfect, eternal embrace. A profound internal alignment that frees you from the need for the external other. You become completely whole within your own being, an emperor of your own inner kingdom. To systematically dismantle these heavy chains of social conditioning, to step entirely out of the mechanical ruts of the mind, and to fully reclaim the original, sovereign power of your consciousness is an extraordinary, life-altering process. It requires a practical, structured approach to inner engineering, a science that shifts you from a state of mechanical reaction to absolute cosmic mastery. For those rare and courageous individuals who feel a profound, burning call to dive deeply into this transformative alchemy, to unlock their hidden potential and stand fully in their authentic divinity, you can explore our comprehensive spiritual guide, the Hidden Energy Protocol, Reclaim Your God Mode, which is available directly through the links provided in the description below. This essential protocol serves as a bridge to help you dissolve the deep-seated psychological armor of the ego, guiding you back to that pristine state of empty innocence where you no longer push the current of life, but float effortlessly as a pure expression of the timeless whole. Drop the heavy burden of your seeking mind. Stop looking for answers in the distance and allow your consciousness to settle into the exquisite, peaceful emptiness of your own true nature. And when you settle into that exquisite, peaceful emptiness, the very nature of your relationship with existence undergoes a total transfiguration, shifting away from intellectual curiosity into a deep, unconditional love affair. This is precisely why the experience of taking sannyas can never be explained through logical definitions or conceptual frameworks. It must be tasted, lived, and felt directly in the deepest recesses of your heart. The rational mind always wants to analyze everything from a safe distance, attempting to break down the mysterious chemistry of love into neat categories of cause and effect. But love completely defies the laws of logic. The great philosopher Bertrand Russell used to make a beautiful distinction between two completely different types of knowledge. The knowledge that comes from simple acquaintance, which is superficial and external, and the profound knowing that arises only through love. Acquaintance means you know about someone or something from the outside. You can read books about a person, gather facts about their life, analyze their behaviors, and yet remain a total stranger to their inner reality. But knowing through love requires that you drop your defenses, step inside their burning house, and allow your separate identity to dissolve into their presence. Sannyas can never be understood through the dry acquaintance of the intellect. It is a supreme communion of being that belongs entirely to the dimension of love. The legendary Zen master Bodhidharma used to say that there are two distinct doors to the ultimate truth: the outer door and the inner door. The outer door is the path of philosophy, theology, and scriptural study, where you go round and round about, collecting words, debating dogmas, and spinning endless theories, yet you never arrive anywhere near the center. You remain outside the castle, playing with shadows, completely blind to the living treasure that resides within. The inner door is the path of real religion, the path of Zen and Sannyas, which does not waste time with superficial dualities or intellectual detours. It simply hits the target directly, pierces the veil of the ego, and completely disappears into the ultimate reality. When you choose the inner door, you are no longer interested in accumulating information about the divine. You are ready to be transformed by the divine. This transformation demands an immense, radical courage, because it is a journey into the uncharted territories of the unknown, where all your familiar reference points, your social status, your knowledge, and your security will be utterly stripped away. You are standing on the edge of a great precipice, and the Master is not offering you a new set of ideas to comfort your mind. He is offering you an invitation to jump into the bottomless abyss of absolute freedom. This direct transmission of truth beyond language is beautifully illuminated in the ancient story of the flower sermon, one of the most foundational events in the lineage of Zen. One morning, 10,000 monks had gathered in a silent valley eagerly waiting to listen to the Gautama Buddha speak. They sat with their eyes closed, their minds focused, ready to memorize his profound words and write them down in their scriptures. But when Buddha arrived, he did not ascend the platform to deliver a sermon. He simply sat down quietly, holding a single lotus flower in his hand, and stared at it without uttering a single word. Minutes passed, an hour passed, and the silence became heavy, thick, and deeply uncomfortable for the logical minds of the assembly. The monks began to look at each other with deep perplexity and restlessness, wondering why the master was remaining so inexplicably silent. Suddenly, in the midst of that tense intellectual confusion, an old monk named Mahakashyap looked at the Buddha, looked at the lotus flower, and started laughing loudly, madly, and uproariously. He had seen the point. He had looked through the form directly into the formless reality. Buddha looked at Mahakashyap, called him to stand before the entire assembly, handed him the beautiful lotus flower, and declared to the stunned crowd that everything that could be said through language, everything that could be captured by words and scriptures, he had already given to all of them. But that which cannot be said through words, the wordless essence of the divine, he had just transmitted directly to Mahakashyap. In that single moment of shared silence and laughter, Mahakashyap became the very first Zen master, receiving a transmission that was completely beyond the boundary of books and doctrines. Sannyas is exactly that kind of transference, a profound transmission of energy that happens far beyond the realm of scriptures, logic, or intellectual understanding. Up to now, whatever you have understood from my words has been purely conceptual, a gathering of beautiful ideas that have helped you look outside the fence of your conditioning. My words have opened many small paths for you, helping you see the limitations of your mind. But the ultimate path, the pathless path of absolute awakening, can only open when you allow me to touch your very being directly. Sannyas means making an unconditional gesture from your side that you are completely finished with your defenses, that you are ready to drop your psychological armor, and that you are willing to remain totally vulnerable to the presence of the Master. It is an act of total, unreserved trust. Right now, you only trust your own ego, your own calculations, and your own past experiences, which is why you can only travel up to a certain superficial point and get stuck. To cross the boundary of the mind, you must have the courage to trust someone who has already dissolved into the ocean, someone who can serve as a direct catalyst for your own disappearance. Sannyas means allowing the Master to destroy the false identity you have spent lifetimes building, so that your true, original face can finally shine through the ruins of your ego. Many seekers feel a deep love for the voice of the Master. They feel comforted by his words, and they are fascinated by his presence. Yet, they hesitate to take the final leap into sannyas because they are deeply terrified of losing their independence. They listen to the tapes, they look at the pictures of the Master, and they feel a great sense of strength, beauty, joy, and sorrow overflowing within their hearts. Yet they want to remain the masters of the game. They say, "I feel you are my master and in a sense my beloved, but I am perfectly content just looking at your picture and feeling your energy from a distance." But you must understand that as long as you are playing with a picture or a statue, you remain the absolute master of the situation. You can put my picture anywhere you want. You can hang it on a prominent wall, you can hide it in a drawer, or you can throw it away whenever you get angry. With a dead object, your ego feels perfectly safe, perfectly comfortable, because it faces no real challenge. This is the deep psychological reason why humanity always avoids living Buddhas and worships their dead statues for centuries after they are gone. A dead Buddha can never look into your eyes and shatter your illusions, but an alive master is an immediate danger to your ego. A beautiful story is told about the great painter Picasso that perfectly illustrates this human tendency to fall in love with reflections rather than reality. A wealthy woman came to visit Picasso in his studio and said to him with immense enthusiasm, "Oh, master, just the other day I saw your self-portrait in a close friend's house, and it was so extraordinarily beautiful, so profoundly real, that I could almost feel your living presence within the canvas. And I was so deeply fascinated and overcome with emotion that I even leaned forward and kissed the picture." Picasso looked at her with a mischievous smile and asked, "And tell me, did the picture kiss you back?" The woman looked at him with complete bewilderment and said, "What are you saying, master? How can a painted picture ever kiss me back?" Picasso shrugged his shoulders and said, "Then it was not me. You can go on playing with pictures, tapes, and books, but they will never kiss you back. To become a sannyasin means to allow my living kiss. And let me tell you, it is an absolute death kiss. It is a kiss that completely destroys the separate ego, leaving no trace of the old identity behind." Seekers often try to rationalize their hesitation by creating beautiful, poetic philosophies to justify their fear of commitment. They say, "I feel I receive deep answers from the trees, the clouds, the stones, and the wind. I feel that you are them, they are you, and I am also part of them, and we are all in this magnificent universe together. So why should I take sannyas and choose a single person over the rest of reality? To take sannyas feels like choosing a small part over the vast whole, and since I love the whole, I want to remain uncommitted. This sounds incredibly spiritual, beautifully profound, and deeply poetic, but it is nothing but a subtle strategy of the ego to protect itself from a real crisis. The trees, the clouds, and the stones are beautifully silent. They will never create any trouble for you. They will never confront you with your hypocrisy, and they will never demand that you sacrifice your pride. When you think you are receiving answers from a tree or a cloud, you are simply projecting your own hidden thoughts, your own inner voice, onto the silent canvas of nature and receiving it back like an echo. It is a safe, solitary game where your ego remains the absolute dictator of the experience. With a living master, the game is completely different because I am here to create immense trouble for your ego. I am not here to validate your poetic fancies or support your spiritual daydreams. I am here to serve as an authentic, uncompromising door to the ultimate whole. When you surrender to a master, you are not choosing a small part against the rest of reality. You are choosing the whole through the direct vehicle of the master. Right now, you cannot connect directly with the infinite cosmos because your vision is completely clouded by the dust of your thoughts, your prejudices, and your separate identity. You need a living bridge, a hand that can hold yours and guide you across the turbulent river of the mind. A small child has the natural potentiality to walk, but in the beginning, he needs the mother's hand to gain confidence, balance, and courage. The mother's hand is not an imprisonment. It is a temporary support that is offered out of pure love. And the moment the child is ready to stand on his own 2 feet, the hand is instantly withdrawn. Let my hand be exactly like that mother's hand for you. I am not here to make you dependent on me, nor am I here to rob you of your natural freedom. The day I feel that your inner mirror has become completely clean, that your chattering mind has stopped, and that you are ready to float effortlessly into the vast ocean of existence without any support, I will be the happiest person in the world to withdraw my hand and push you into the infinite whole. But before that ultimate freedom can happen, you must undergo the beautiful process of total unlearning, and that requires an absolute, unconditional surrender. A partial surrender is not a surrender at all. It is just a calculated compromise of the ego. You cannot say, I will give you 80% of my trust and keep 20% for myself just in case things go wrong. That 20% will remain the master, control your journey, and prevent you from ever crossing the boundary of the known. Surrender must be total, an absolute let go where you say, I am ready to disappear completely. The real question is not about choosing between me and the whole universe. The real question is about choosing between your ego and the master. As long as you remain uncommitted, clinging to your old way of living, your old prejudices, and your comfortable habits, you are choosing your own ignorance over the radiant possibility of awakening. You are protecting your chains, defending your miseries, and clutching your limitations tightly as if they are a precious treasure. What do you truly have to lose by surrendering to the divine? You have nothing to lose but your darkness, your anxieties, and your deep-seated illusions. Sannyas is a golden opportunity that rarely becomes available in the long, repetitive journey of human evolution. And while the door is open, while the current is flowing, you must summon the supreme courage to take the final jump. For me, you are already a sannyasin, already a pure expression of the cosmic mind. You are just hesitating on the river bank, wavering, overthinking, and trembling before the absolute vastness of the water. Drop the hesitation. Stop wasting your precious time with endless intellectual calculations and allow your separate identity to dissolve into the timeless river of life here and now. Look at the trees, how beautifully relaxed they are. Look at the stars, how silently they shine, and listen to the ancient song of existence that is vibrating within your own heart this very second. The universe is an undivided, organic whole, a magnificent dance of pure energy where everything is interconnected in a state of absolute harmony. You are not a stranger here. You are not an accidental visitor trying to survive in a hostile land. You are an essential, beautiful note in this cosmic symphony. When you drop the false concept of the separate ego, when you stop trying to become someone else and simply relax into your own authentic ordinariness, the entire universe begins to pour its blessings into your being. You become an emperor without owning a single thing, a pure mirror that reflects the absolute glory of the divine without ever collecting a single speck of dust. Live this life as an unmotivated celebration. Walk this earth with a light and graceful step, and let your consciousness bloom like 1,000 lotuses in the radiant silence of the eternal present. To systematically dismantle the heavy armor of social hypnosis, to free your life energy from the suffocating ruts of mechanical reaction, and to fully reclaim the original, sovereign power of your consciousness is an extraordinary, life-altering alchemy that requires a practical and structured map for your inner engineering. For those rare and deeply committed individuals who feel an intense, burning call to step entirely out of the matrix of the ego, to break through the deep-seated psychological illusions of time, and to stand fully in their authentic divinity. You can find our specialized, comprehensive guide, the Hidden Energy Protocol, Reclaim Your God Mode, available directly through the links provided in the description below.